Maritime Enigmas. Maritime Enigmas. The Mary Celeste. Imagine, if you will, the vastness of the Atlantic Ocean. Waves rolling endlessly beneath an infinite sky. The year is 1872, and somewhere upon these waters a ship drifts silently. Her sails catch the wind, moving her forward through the swells, yet no hand guides her wheel. No voice calls out across her deck. She is the Mary Celeste, and she has become one of the sea's most enduring mysteries. Let us drift back through time, back to that December day when Captain David Morehouse stood upon the deck of his ship, the Dei Gratia, and spotted something unusual on the horizon. A vessel moving strangely through the waters between the Azores and the Portuguese coast. Something about her movement seemed wrong, unnatural, like a dancer who had lost the rhythm of the music. As the Dei Gratia drew closer, Captain Morehouse recognized the ship. It was the Mary Celeste, a merchant brigantine that had left New York harbor just weeks before, bound for Genoa with a cargo of industrial alcohol. Morehouse knew her captain, Benjamin Briggs, a man of good reputation and experience. They had dined together before their departures, sharing stories as sailors do, never knowing that one of those ships would soon become a legend. But now, as Morehouse studied the Mary Celeste through his spyglass, he saw no one at the wheel, no sailors working the rigging. The ship appeared abandoned, drifting like a ghost upon the sea. The boarding party that rowed across to the Mary Celeste found a scene that has puzzled minds for over a century and a half. The ship was in relatively good condition. There was water in the hold, yes, but not enough to threaten her seaworthiness. The cargo of 1,701 barrels of commercial alcohol was largely intact, secured in the hold below. In the captain's cabin, personal belongings remained undisturbed. Charts lay on the navigation table. The ship's log sat open, its last entry dated November 25th, 10 days before the discovery. But of the 10 people who should have been aboard, Captain Briggs, his wife Sarah, their 2-year-old daughter Sophia, and 7 crew members, there was no trace. The ship's lifeboat was missing, suggesting they had abandoned ship deliberately. But why? What could drive experienced sailors to leave a seaworthy vessel and take their chances in a small boat upon the open ocean? The galley, where meals were prepared, held provisions enough for 6 months. Pots and pans hung in their places. In the crew's quarters, personal effects remained: pipes, boots, oilskin coats. The kind of things sailors would surely take if they had time to gather their belongings. Yet these items sat undisturbed, as if their owners had simply vanished into the salt air. Now, Captain Morehouse would have found the silence aboard the Mary Celeste profound. Ships are rarely quiet places. They creak and groan, their rigging hums in the wind, waves lap against the hull. But an abandoned ship carries a different quality of silence. It is the absence of human sound that makes it so complete, so absolute. No footsteps on the deck above, no voices calling, no laughter from the crew's quarters. Just the ship herself, breathing with the ocean. To understand the mystery, we must first know the Mary Celeste herself. She was born as the Amazon in 1861 at Spencer's Island in Nova Scotia, built of strong timber from the surrounding forests. Her early years were troubled. Her first captain died before completing her maiden voyage. She ran aground. She collided with other vessels. Some began to whisper that she was cursed, that ill fortune followed her like a shadow. In 1868, she was purchased by new owners and rechristened Mary Celeste. Under Captain Benjamin Briggs, she had been sailing successfully, carrying cargo across the Atlantic. Briggs was no superstitious sailor. He was a respected captain from a seafaring family, deeply religious, known for his temperance and good judgment. He brought his wife and young daughter aboard, not out of recklessness, but because he trusted his ship and his crew. On November 7, 1872, the Mary Celeste departed New York harbor. Her cargo, 1,701 barrels of denatured alcohol, bound for Genoa, Italy. The weather that November was rough. Stormy seas delayed their departure by several days. But eventually they set sail, the Mary Celeste cutting through the grey Atlantic waters, heading east toward Europe. For weeks she sailed on. The log entries in Captain Briggs' careful hand noted their progress. the weather conditions, the state of the ship. These were routine entries, the kind any captain makes day after day. There was nothing in those words to suggest anything was wrong. The last entry, written on November 25th, placed them near the Azores. After that, silence. When the mystery of the Mary Celeste became public, theories bloomed like algae in warm water. Some were plausible, others fantastical, all attempting to explain the unexplainable. Could it have been pirates? The cargo was valuable after all, but pirates would have taken the ship itself, or at least plundered more thoroughly. The cargo remained, the valuables in the captain's cabin untouched. If pirates had come, they left without taking what they came for. Perhaps mutiny. But the crew was small and hand-picked by Captain Briggs. There were no signs of violence, no blood, no indication of struggle. And why would mutineers abandon a perfectly good ship laden with cargo they could sell? Some whispered of sea monsters, of giant squids or creatures from the deep. But these are the stories sailors tell in port after too much rum. The Mary Celeste bore no marks of attack from any creature, earthly or otherwise. Others suggested a sudden waterspout, or some violent weather event that frightened the crew into abandoning ship. But again, the ship was largely in order. Her rigging, while somewhat damaged, was not in catastrophic condition. Over the years, one theory has gained favor among maritime experts. Though, like all theories about the Mary Celeste, it remains just that. A theory, a possibility floating in the realm of the unknown. The cargo was denatured alcohol, industrial alcohol that gives off vapors. 9 of the barrels were found to be empty or damaged when the ship was recovered. Perhaps, these experts suggest, a buildup of alcohol fumes created an explosion risk, or a small explosion occurred. Not large enough to destroy the ship, but frightening enough to make Captain Briggs fear a larger blast was imminent. In such a moment, with his wife and daughter aboard, with his responsibility for his crew weighing on him, Briggs might have ordered everyone into the lifeboat. Perhaps they meant to stay near the ship, trailing behind on a line, waiting to see if she would explode. But if that line broke in rough seas, the Mary Celeste would have sailed on, carried by wind and current, while the lifeboat, small, overcrowded, was left behind in the vast Atlantic. It is a reasonable theory, one that accounts for the facts without requiring pirates or sea monsters or supernatural intervention, but we will never know for certain. The Atlantic keeps her secrets. Captain Briggs, Sarah, little Sophia, and the 7 crew members were never found. They vanished as completely as morning mist when the sun rises. The Mary Celeste herself continued her story, though it would not be a happy one. She was brought to Gibraltar by the salvage crew from the Dei Gratia. There were legal proceedings, questions about whether the abandonment was genuine, suspicions that Captain Morehouse might have been involved in some scheme. But eventually the ship was released to her owners. She sailed again under different captains, carrying different cargoes. But the mystery followed her like a wake follows a ship. The story was told and retold, embellished and exaggerated. In one famous fictional account, the ship was found with meals still warm on the table, with everything in perfect order. Details that were more dramatic than true, but which cemented the legend in popular imagination. The Mary Celeste's end came in 1885, when her final captain deliberately wrecked her on a reef off Haiti as part of an insurance fraud scheme. She broke apart on those rocks, her timbers scattered by the waves, her story complete. But mysteries do not die as easily as ships. The Mary Celeste has lived on in our imagination, a symbol of all the unanswerable questions the sea presents to us. She reminds us that despite all our navigation equipment, all our charts and instruments and modern technology, the ocean remains a place of mystery. That sometimes ships and people disappear, and we are left only with questions. On December 4th, 1872, the Mary Celeste drifted through Atlantic waters, her sails full, her deck empty. Somewhere behind her, perhaps, a lifeboat struggled in the waves, its occupants watching their ship sail away into legend. Or perhaps something else happened, something we have not imagined, some explanation that has eluded all the investigators and theorists and storytellers who have puzzled over this mystery. The sea holds her close, this secret. In the deep waters where the Mary Celeste once sailed, Where Captain Briggs once stood at the wheel with his family nearby, there is only the endless rolling of the waves. They continue their ancient rhythm, patient and eternal, keeping the secrets of all the ships that have sailed upon them. The Mary Celeste teaches us something about mystery itself, that not everything can be explained, that some questions have no answers, and that there is a strange beauty in not knowing. In our modern world, where we can track ships by satellite and communicate across oceans instantly, the Mary Celeste reminds us of a time when the sea was truly vast and unknowable, when a ship could sail away into mystery and never return. And so she drifts still in our minds, if not upon the water. The archetypal ghost ship, the eternal enigma, the Mary Celeste, sailing forever through the mists of history, her deck empty, her story incomplete, her mystery as deep and endless as the ocean itself. Rest now and let the mystery of the Mary Celeste drift through your thoughts like clouds across a moonlit sky. Let the questions float away, unanswered but somehow peaceful in their mystery. The sea keeps her secrets, and perhaps that is as it should be. Some things are meant to remain unknown, wrapped in the gentle fog of time and distance. The Mary Celeste sails on, somewhere in that space between history and legend, between the known and the unknowable. And in that sailing, she carries something beautiful, the reminder that the world still holds mysteries, that not everything is solved or explained or understood. Sleep well, and let the ghost ship drift through your dreams. Maritime Enigmas, the SS Baychimo. Far to the north, where the world grows cold and the sun plays tricks with time, there exists a realm of ice and endless horizons. Here, the Arctic Ocean freezes and thaws with the seasons, creating a landscape that is never quite the same twice. And somewhere in these frozen waters, for decades, a ship wandered alone. She was the SS Baychimo, and her story is one of the most remarkable tales of endurance and mystery the maritime world has ever known. Close your eyes and picture the Arctic in autumn. The air grows sharp and crystalline. The water begins to thicken, forming plates of ice that grind against each other with sounds like distant thunder. The light takes on a peculiar quality, pale and ethereal, as if the world itself is fading into winter's dream. This is where our story begins, in October of 1931, when the Baychimo found herself trapped in ice that would not let her go. The SS Baychimo was born in Sweden in 1914, a steel-hulled cargo steamer built for the Hudson's Bay Company. Her name came from the Inuit people of the Baychimo region, a tribute to the indigenous inhabitants of the lands where she would spend her working life. She was 1,322 tons of sturdy craftsmanship, 230 feet long, built to withstand the challenging conditions of Arctic waters. For 17 years, the Baychimo served her purpose faithfully. Each year, she would make the journey along the northern coast of Canada and Alaska, trading with remote Inuit communities, carrying supplies to isolated settlements, and bringing back furs, fox, mink, and the prized Arctic pelts that were in high demand in the markets of the South. She knew these waters well, the Baychimo. She had navigated through ice fields, weathered Arctic storms, and returned each autumn before the winter freeze made passage impossible. But 1931 would be different. October arrived with unusual ferocity that year. The Baychimo, under the command of Captain John Cornwell, was making her way back south, laden with a valuable cargo of furs worth some $1 million, an enormous sum in those Depression-era years. The ship carried a crew of around 15 men, all experienced in Arctic navigation, all aware of the dangers of lingering too long in these northern waters. But ice cares nothing for experience or awareness. It comes when it comes, and in October 1931, it came early and fast. The ice closed around the Baychimo near Point Barrow, Alaska, locking her in a frozen embrace. This was not entirely unexpected. Arctic vessels were sometimes caught in the ice, and the usual procedure was to wait for the ice to shift, to break up, to release the ship. Captain Cornwell and his crew settled in to wait. Days passed. The ice held firm. The temperature dropped further. The Arctic night grew longer. It became clear that the Baychimo would not escape before winter settled in completely. The Hudson's Bay Company made arrangements to evacuate most of the crew, flying them out to safety while a skeleton crew remained with the ship, keeping watch, tending to her, hoping the ice might still relent. By mid-November, the decision was made to abandon the ship for the winter. The remaining crew would shelter in a camp on the shore, within sight of the Baychimo, waiting until spring when they could return and see if she had survived the winter's grip. The crew removed the most valuable furs from the hold, whatever they could transport to safety, and left the ship locked in ice, silent and alone. On November 24th, a terrible blizzard swept across the Arctic landscape. The wind howled with a voice like the end of the world. Snow fell so thick that visibility dropped to nothing. The crew huddled in their shore camp, unable to see the ship through the white chaos, hoping she would still be there when the storm passed. When the blizzard finally exhausted itself and the air cleared, the crew looked out toward where the Baychimo should have been. But the ice field was empty. The ship had vanished, taken by the storm, presumably crushed and sunk beneath the Arctic ice. It seemed the Baychimo's story had come to its end, as so many ships' stories do in these unforgiving waters. But the Arctic had other plans. Days later, an Inuit seal hunter spotted the Baychimo 25 miles away from where she had been trapped. She was still locked in ice, but the ice field itself had moved, carrying her with it. The ship was still afloat, still intact, drifting with the ice floes like a ghost through the frozen sea. Captain Cornwell and his crew returned to the ship, planning to salvage what cargo remained. But the ice was too dangerous, the ship's position too precarious. Eventually, reluctantly, the decision was made to abandon the Baychimo permanently. The Arctic could keep her. The crew left her to her fate, alone in the ice, and returned south to warmer lands. This should have been the end of the story. But for the Baychimo, it was only the beginning of her legend. Over the months and years that followed, something extraordinary happened. The Baychimo did not sink. She did not break apart. Instead, she became a wanderer, a nomad of the Arctic seas, appearing and disappearing like a phantom. Reports began to come in from across the Arctic. In March 1932, she was spotted by a group of Inuit travelers. In March 1933, she appeared again, this time boarded by a group of explorers who found her still seaworthy but decided not to attempt sailing her out. In 1935, she was seen off the coast of Alaska. In 1939, she drifted past a ship whose crew recognized her and reported the sighting. Year after year, decade after decade, the Baychimo continued her lonely journey through the Arctic waters. She would be seen one year, then vanish for several years, only to reappear hundreds of miles away. She drifted through the Beaufort Sea, through the Chukchi Sea, carried by currents and ice, pushed by winds, following pathways only the Arctic understood. Sometimes she was trapped in ice. Sometimes she floated free in open water. Occasionally people would board her, crews of ships that came across her, scientists and explorers, even adventurers hoping to claim salvage rights. They found her hold still containing some cargo, her structure remarkably intact despite years of exposure to the harshest conditions on Earth. But no one ever managed to bring her in, to tow her to safety. The Arctic always reclaimed her, drawing her back into its frozen embrace. Imagine the Baychimo during those long years of wandering. Imagine her deck, once bustling with crew, now empty and silent. The wheel stands unmanned, turning slowly with the movement of the waves. Ice forms intricate patterns on her railings, delicate and beautiful. Snow drifts across her deck, accumulating in corners, covering the pathways where sailors once walked. Inside, the cargo holds still carry their furs, frozen now, preserved by the Arctic cold. The crew's quarters sit empty, bunks made but never slept in, belonging to men who are long gone to other ships, other lives, or to their final rest. The engine room, once filled with the heat and noise of machinery, is cold and still. Everything is frozen in time, a moment preserved, a ship caught between existence and memory. The Arctic sky wheels overhead, the midnight sun of summer making day eternal, the polar night of winter bringing darkness that lasts for months. The aurora borealis dances in curtains of green and purple light, illuminating the Baychimo in her solitude, painting her in colors that have no names. She is a ship out of time, belonging neither to the world of the living nor quite to the realm of the lost. Why did the Baychimo survive so long? How did she resist the forces that destroy lesser vessels? There are practical explanations, of course. She was well built, her steel hull strong and thick. The cold preserved her in ways that warmer waters would not. The ice, though it trapped her, also protected her from the worst of the storms, cradling her even as it imprisoned her. But there is something more to the story, something that defies easy explanation. Ships are more than wood and steel and rivets. They take on a character, a spirit, shaped by their years of service and the people who crew them. The Baychimo had been a faithful servant of the Hudson's Bay Company for 17 years before her abandonment. Perhaps she simply refused to surrender, refused to sink, continuing her duty even without a crew to command her. The sightings continued through the 1940s, the 1950s, the 1960s. Each one was logged, noted, added to the growing legend. The Baychimo became famous, a celebrity among ghost ships. People searched for her, hoping to photograph her, to board her, to bring her home at last. But she remained elusive, appearing when she chose, vanishing back into the Arctic vastness. In 1969, she was spotted for what would be the last confirmed time. A group in the Beaufort Sea saw her, locked once again in ice, still recognizably the Baychimo, despite nearly 4 decades of wandering. After that, silence, no more sightings, no more reports. Reflective, peaceful. Where did she go, the Baychimo? Did she finally succumb to the ice, her hull at last breached, her long journey ended? Did she sink in some storm, in some lonely stretch of Arctic water, her story complete? Or does she drift still, somewhere in the frozen north, beyond the reaches of modern ships and their sophisticated tracking, maintaining her independence to the end? In 2006, the Alaskan government launched a search for the Baychimo, hoping to locate her and perhaps bring her home as a museum piece, a testament to Arctic history. But the search found nothing. The Arctic, it seemed, had taken her fully, absorbed her into its mysteries. Perhaps this is fitting. The Baychimo belonged to the Arctic in a way that few ships ever do. She knew those waters in summer and winter, in ice and open sea. She served the people who lived there, carried goods that sustained remote communities, connected the isolated with the wider world. And when her crew abandoned her, when the civilized world gave her up for lost, the Arctic claimed her and kept her. There is a beauty in the Baychimo's story, a strange grace in her decades of wandering. She became something rare. A ship truly free, beholden to no captain, following no trade route, serving no commercial purpose. She simply existed, moving with the rhythms of the Arctic, at peace with the ice and wind and current. Think of her on a summer night, when the sun never quite sets, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. The ice around her glows with inner light. Seabirds call in the distance, the water laps gently at her hull. She is alone but not lonely, a witness to the vast beauty of the Arctic. A silent participant in the endless cycle of freeze and thaw, light and darkness. Think of her in winter, when the darkness comes and stays. The stars wheel overhead with a brilliance impossible in southern skies. The aurora paints the ice in shifting colors. The temperature drops so low that sound itself seems to freeze. And there the Baychimo sits, ice-locked, waiting for spring with a patience that is almost eternal. The Inuit people who sometimes saw her must have wondered at this strange ship, this wanderer without a crew. Perhaps they told stories about her around their fires, wove her into their legends of the Arctic. She became part of the landscape, as much a feature of those waters as the ice itself. The SS Baychimo sailed for 17 years under human command and then drifted for nearly 40 years without one. In that time, she covered thousands of miles, weathered countless storms, survived conditions that would have destroyed most vessels. She became a legend, a mystery, an enigma wrapped in ice and isolation. We may never know her final fate. The Arctic keeps her secrets as jealously as any ocean. Perhaps one day a ship will come across wreckage bearing her name. Perhaps researchers will locate her remains using advanced technology, giving closure to her story. Or perhaps she will remain forever lost, a ghost ship in the truest sense, existing somewhere between reality and myth. But in our imagination, the Baychimo still drifts, still wanders through the Arctic seas, her hull strong, her spirit unbroken. She moves with the ice, patient and enduring, a testament to the resilience of ships and the mystery of the sea. She is the Arctic ghost ship, eternal and unreachable, sailing through waters that shimmer with ice and memory. Let the image of the Baychimo drift through your thoughts now. See her moving slowly through waters of impossible blue, surrounded by ice that glows white and pure. The air is cold and clean, the silence profound. She is at peace, this wandering ship, free from the demands of commerce and crew, existing simply to exist. Sleep now and dream of endless horizons, of ice and sky meeting in the distance, of a ship that refused to surrender. The Baychimo sails on somewhere, in the spaces between waking and sleeping, between the known and the unknown. She is the Arctic's secret, the North's gift to mystery. Rest well and let the frozen seas carry you gently into dreams. Maritime Enigmas, the Carol Deering. Off the coast of North Carolina, where the Atlantic Ocean meets the shifting sands of the Outer Banks, there is a place sailors have long regarded with respect and wariness. Diamond Shoals, they call it, a treacherous stretch of shallow waters where currents collide and ships have met their end for centuries. The locals know it as the graveyard of the Atlantic, a fitting name for waters that have claimed so many vessels. It was here, on a cold January morning in 1921, that a lightship keeper peered through his telescope and saw something that would become one of the sea's most puzzling mysteries. A 5-masted schooner sat grounded on the shoals, her sails still set, her hull resting on the sand. She was the Carol Deering, and she was completely, utterly empty. Let us drift back to the beginning of her story, to a time when the Carol Deering was new and full of promise. She was born in 1919 at Bath, Maine, that legendary home of American shipbuilding, where the forests came down to meet the sea and skilled craftsmen turned timber into vessels of grace and strength. She was a beautiful ship, a 5-masted commercial schooner, 255 feet long, her white hull gleaming, her masts reaching skyward like the fingers of a hand. The Deering was built for the G.G. Deering Company and named after the son of the company's manager. She was designed to carry cargo, lumber, coal, whatever needed transport along the Atlantic coast and beyond. In an age when steam was beginning to dominate, she represented the last flowering of the age of sail, a testament to a way of seafaring that was slowly fading into memory. Her maiden voyage took her south in 1920, and by all accounts, the ship performed beautifully. She handled well, sailed true, carried her cargo safely. Everything suggested a long and successful career ahead of her. But the sea had other plans. In August of 1920, the Carol Deering departed Norfolk, Virginia, bound for Rio de Janeiro with a cargo of coal. Her captain was William M. Merritt, a 66-year-old veteran sailor who knew the Atlantic well. But Captain Merritt fell ill during the voyage south, and by the time they reached Rio de Janeiro in September, he was too unwell to continue. The decision was made to replace him for the journey home. The new captain was Willis B. Warmell, also an experienced seaman, also a man who had spent decades upon the water. Captain Warmell assembled his crew in Rio, 10 men in total, including himself. There was Charles B. McClellan, the first mate, a man who reportedly clashed with the captain from the start. There were engineers and sailors, able seamen and a steward, each with their own stories, their own reasons for signing aboard. On December 2, 1920, the Carol Deering departed Rio de Janeiro, sailing north with a cargo of coal, heading home to Norfolk. The journey should have taken about 6 weeks. The Atlantic lay before them, familiar and vast. On January 23, 1921, the Carol Deering passed the Cape Lookout lightship off the coast of North Carolina. A lightship keeper reported the sighting and noted something unusual. A man on the Deering, reddish-haired, possibly the first mate rather than the captain, called out through a megaphone that the ship had lost its anchors. The crew on deck appeared to be loitering around the forward cabin in a way that struck the lightship keeper as odd. Not quite right, not following the usual protocols of a well-run ship. This was the last confirmed sighting of the Carol A. Deering with anyone aboard. 6 days later, on January 29th, a lookout at the Cape Hatteras Coast Guard station spotted a schooner aground on Diamond Shoals. The weather was too rough to investigate immediately, but through a telescope they could see it was a large vessel, hard aground, her sails still set as if she had been under full sail when she struck. For 2 days, storms prevented anyone from reaching the ship. The schooner sat there, visible from shore but unreachable, a mystery in plain sight. When the weather finally cleared enough for a boarding party to reach her on January 31st, they found a scene that has puzzled investigators ever since. The boarding party climbed aboard the Carol A. Deering and found themselves on a ghost ship. The crew was gone. All 11 men, Captain Wormel, First Mate McClellan, and the rest, had vanished completely. But unlike some abandoned ships, where everything is in order, the Deering showed signs that something unusual had happened. The ship's 2 lifeboats were missing, suggesting the crew had left deliberately. The anchors were gone, confirming what the man on deck had called out to the lightship. But why would a ship lose both anchors? Personal belongings of the crew were absent. The ship's log, navigation equipment, and chronometer were missing. These were not things that would be taken in a panic evacuation. Someone had removed them purposefully. In the galley, the boarding party found a meal prepared but uneaten. Food sat on the table as if the crew had been about to dine when something interrupted them. Pots and pans were set out. It was a scene frozen in time, a moment abandoned. The crew's quarters showed signs of hurried departure. Some clothing remained, but personal effects were largely gone. It was as if the crew had time to gather some belongings, but not everything, or perhaps chose not to take certain items. The steering equipment on deck was damaged, though whether this happened before or after the grounding was impossible to determine. Most eerily, all the ship's navigation instruments, charts, and papers were gone. The ship's log, which would have told the story of the voyage, had been removed. It was as if someone wanted to erase any record of what had happened during those final days at sea. Contemplative, mysterious. When news of the abandoned Carol A. Deering reached the public, theories bloomed like flowers after rain. In the early 1920s, America was fascinated by mysteries of the sea, by tales of piracy and mutiny and strange disappearances. The Deering captured the public imagination, and newspapers ran wild with speculation. Mutiny was the first theory many considered. The reports of tension between Captain Wormel and First Mate McClellan suggested a crew divided. Perhaps McClellan had led a mutiny, taken control of the ship, and then, what? Abandoned her? Sailed her deliberately onto the shoals? It was possible, but it raised as many questions as it answered. If the crew mutinied, where did they go? Why were they never found? Pirates seemed a romantic possibility. This was the era of prohibition, when rum runners prowled the Atlantic coast, smuggling illegal alcohol. Perhaps the Carol A. Deering had encountered rum runners or modern pirates who took the crew for ransom or murdered them and sank their bodies at sea. But again, why leave the ship? Why not take the vessel itself, or at least plunder it more thoroughly? Some whispered of supernatural causes, of strange forces at sea. The year 1921 saw numerous ships disappear or behave strangely in the Atlantic, a cluster of incidents that would later be incorporated into the legend of the Bermuda Triangle. Could the Deering have encountered something inexplicable, something beyond rational understanding? It was a theory that satisfied the imagination, if not the mind. The United States government took the mystery seriously. Multiple agencies investigated: the Department of Commerce, the State Department, even the Department of Justice. They interviewed anyone who had seen the ship, anyone who had known the crew. They searched for the missing men along the coast, in ports, anywhere they might have gone. One intriguing lead emerged. Another ship, the SS Hewitt, had reportedly been boarded by a man in a small boat near the location where the Deering was later found. This man claimed his ship was aground on Diamond Shoals and needed help. But before the Hewitt could assist, The small boat was swamped by waves and the man disappeared. The Hewitt's crew searched but found nothing. Could this have been someone from the Carroll A. Deering? The timeline was right, the location appropriate, but the man was never identified, and the Hewitt itself mysteriously sank shortly after, taking any additional evidence to the bottom of the sea. Other ships had vanished around the same time. The SS Hewitt, as mentioned, sank with all hands. The steam freighter SS Cyclops had disappeared in 1918 with 309 people aboard, the largest loss of life in U.S. naval history, not directly involving combat. Several other vessels went missing in early 1921. Some investigators wondered if these disappearances were connected, perhaps part of a larger pattern of piracy or some natural phenomenon affecting the Atlantic. Years passed, and still the mystery remained unsolved. The Carroll A. Deering herself was eventually dynamited where she lay. She was too damaged to salvage and posed a hazard to navigation. The explosions broke her apart, scattering her timbers across Diamond Shoals. Her physical form was destroyed, but her mystery lived on. Imagine, if you will, those final days aboard the Carroll A. Deering. The ship sailing north along the coast, making good time, the crew going about their duties. Perhaps there was tension between the captain and his first mate. Perhaps the crew was restless, eager to reach home after months at sea. The weather was cold for men accustomed to the tropics of Rio de Janeiro. Something happened after they passed the Cape Lookout lightship. Something that caused the entire crew to abandon a seaworthy vessel. Was it fear? Was it force? Did they leave willingly, or were they compelled? The meal left uneaten in the galley suggests the departure was sudden, but the missing personal effects and navigation equipment suggest at least some planning. Perhaps the truth is simpler than the theories suggest. Perhaps the ship encountered a storm, more severe than expected, and damage to the steering made Captain Wormel fear she would founder. Perhaps he ordered everyone into the lifeboats, intending to wait out the weather and return to the ship. But winter storms in the Atlantic are fierce and unforgiving. Small boats can be swamped in minutes, capsized by waves, lost in the darkness and spray. Perhaps the Carroll A. Deering sailed on without her crew, carried by wind and current, until she found her final resting place on Diamond Shoals. Perhaps the lifeboats were swamped and the crew lost, their bodies claimed by the sea, never to be recovered. It would explain the abandonment, the missing boats, the tragedy of it all. Or perhaps something stranger happened, something we cannot quite imagine from our safe distance in time. The sea keeps its secrets, and the Atlantic off the Outer Banks has always been a place of mystery, where currents run strange and weather changes without warning, where reality sometimes seems to blur at the edges. The Carroll A. Deering has become part of the legend of the Bermuda Triangle, though Diamond Shoals is well north of that mythical region. She represents something deeper than geographical boundaries. She represents the eternal mystery of the sea, the way ships and people can vanish, leaving only questions behind. In maritime museums, you can sometimes find photographs of the Carroll A. Deering as she appeared that January morning, grounded on the shoals, her masts tilted, her sails still set. She looks peaceful in those images, almost serene, as if she simply chose to rest upon the sand. There is no sign of violence, no indication of disaster. She is simply there, and her crew simply is not. The families of the 11 men who sailed aboard the Deering never learned what became of their loved ones. Captain Wormel, First Mate McClellan, and the 9 others who crewed that final voyage are remembered now only as names in maritime records. Ghosts of a century past, men who sailed into mystery and never returned. Sometimes, on foggy mornings off the Outer Banks, when the mist rolls in from the Atlantic and visibility drops to nothing, locals say you can almost see her. The Carroll A. Deering, sailing past with her sails full, her deck empty, forever approaching Diamond Shoals, but never quite arriving. It is a legend, of course, a story told in coastal towns, but legends often carry truth within them. Truth about mystery and loss and the sea's eternal power. The graveyard of the Atlantic has claimed many ships, but few have captured the imagination quite like the Carroll A. Deering. She was not lost in a dramatic storm, not destroyed by obvious catastrophe. She simply appeared one morning, empty and silent, offering no answers, only questions that echo across the decades. What happened in those final hours? Where did the crew go? Why did they leave their ship? These questions have no certain answers. They drift through time like fog across water, impossible to grasp, beautiful in their elusiveness. The Carol A. Deering teaches us about the limits of knowing. We want answers, want explanations, want to solve every mystery and tie up every loose end. But some stories resist resolution. Some mysteries remain mysterious, and there is a strange comfort in that. A reminder that the world still holds secrets, that not everything can be explained or understood or filed away neatly. Let the story of the Carol A. Deering drift through your thoughts now, gentle as fog, soft as waves on sand. See her as she appeared that January morning, grounded but graceful, empty but somehow peaceful. Her crew is gone, vanished into the Atlantic's embrace, but the ship remains in memory, in photographs, in stories told and retold. The sea moves on, as it always does, patient and eternal. Waves wash over diamond shoals where the Deering once rested. Ships pass by, modern vessels with GPS and radar and sophisticated communication, so different from the sailing ships of old. But the mystery remains, suspended in time like a ship in fog. Sleep now and dream of sailing ships with white hulls and tall masts, of crews that sang as they worked, of the endless meeting of sea and sky. Dream of mysteries that need not be solved, of questions that are beautiful simply for existing. The Carol A. Deering sails on in memory, forever approaching shore, forever carrying her secret. Rest well and let the gentle mystery carry you into peaceful dreams. Maritime Enigmas, the Ourang Medan. There are stories the sea tells, and then there are stories told about the sea. Some mysteries are carved in history, documented in logbooks and official records, witnessed by many and verified by time. Others exist in a more shadowy realm, passed from sailor to sailor, recorded in fragments, whispered in ports, hovering somewhere between truth and legend. The tale of the Ourang Medan belongs to this second category, a mystery wrapped inside an enigma, a story so strange that even its existence is questioned. Close your eyes and imagine the waters between Sumatra and Malaysia, the Strait of Malacca, where the Indian Ocean meets the South China Sea. These are busy waters, ancient trade routes where ships have passed for centuries carrying spices and silk, tea and treasure. The year is 1947, or perhaps 1948. Even the date is uncertain, lost in the fog of conflicting accounts. And somewhere in these waters, a story begins that will haunt maritime lore for decades to come. The story comes to us through radio signals, fragmentary and desperate. Multiple ships in the area reportedly picked up a distress call, a message that grew more frantic with each transmission. The voice spoke in English, or perhaps Dutch. Accounts vary, identifying itself as coming from the Dutch freighter Ourang Medan. All officers, including captain, are dead, the message said, lying in chart room and bridge, possibly whole crew dead. The transmission continued, becoming more disjointed, more desperate. Then came words that would echo through maritime history. I die. After that, only silence. The Morse code dissolved into static, and the Ourang Medan, if indeed that was the ship, went quiet. Two American vessels, the Silver Star and the City of Baltimore, were reportedly in the vicinity and picked up these distress calls. Some accounts mention other ships as well, a British vessel perhaps, or other freighters in those busy shipping lanes. The exact details shift and blur depending on who tells the story. Like a ship seen through morning mist, never quite coming into focus. The Silver Star, according to the most common version of the tale, altered course to search for the distressed vessel. For hours they searched the waters, scanning the horizon for any sign of a ship in trouble. The Strait of Malacca is wide, and finding a single vessel without precise coordinates is like searching for a particular wave in the ocean. But eventually they found her, or something was found. A ship dead in the water, drifting with the current. The Ourang Medan, if the name painted on her hull was to be believed. She showed no signs of fire or collision, no obvious damage to her structure. She simply floated, silent and still, under the tropical sun. The boarding party from the Silver Star climbed aboard the Ourang Medan and entered a scene from a nightmare, though we tell it gently now, softly, like a story half remembered from a dream. The crew was dead, all of them, according to the accounts. They lay on the decks, in the corridors, in their stations, captain, officers, sailors, even the ship's dog. But it was not just that they were dead. It was the manner of their death that has made this story legendary. Their faces, the boarding party reported, were frozen in expressions of terror, eyes wide open, staring at something unseen, mouths agape as if caught in mid-scream, arms reaching upward as though warding off some invisible threat. They lay where they had fallen, scattered throughout the ship, like pieces of some macabre puzzle. The boarding party searched for signs of violence, for any explanation of what could have killed an entire crew. But there were no wounds, no blood, no indication of fighting or struggle, no signs of poisoning or illness that would explain a mass death. The men had simply died, all at once or nearly so, their faces locked in final moments of inexplicable fear. The rescue crew felt it too, or so they reported, a sense of wrongness aboard the ship, a coldness that had nothing to do with temperature, an atmosphere of dread that seemed to permeate the very air. Even in the tropical heat, they felt a chill. Even in the bright daylight, shadows seemed too deep. The Silver Star's crew decided to tow the Ourang Medan to port, to bring her in for proper investigation. Lines were attached, the tow began. But the sea, it seemed, had other intentions. As the two ships moved through the water, smoke began to rise from the Ourang Medan's lower decks. The rescue crew hurriedly cut the tow lines and moved away. The smoke thickened, became darker, and then, according to the accounts, the Ourang Medan exploded. The blast was violent enough to lift the ship partially out of the water before she broke apart and sank, taking with her any evidence of what had happened, any answers to the mystery, any hope of understanding. She went down quickly, the story says, disappearing beneath the waves of the Strait of Malacca, leaving only debris and questions floating on the surface. The dead crew, the terrified faces, whatever secret had killed them, all of it sank into the depths, lost forever to the sea. This is the story as it has been told and retold over the decades. But here is where our mystery deepens, where the tale of the Ourang Medan becomes truly strange. Because when investigators tried to verify this story, tried to find official records of the ship, the rescue, the explosion, they found almost nothing. The Ourang Medan does not appear in standard shipping registries. No Dutch company claims to have owned her. No records of her construction, her cargo, her previous voyages have been definitively located. The name itself means man from Medan in Malay, suggesting Indonesian origin, but Indonesian maritime records show no such vessel. The Silver Star exists in records as a real ship, but her logs for the relevant period reportedly make no mention of rescuing or encountering the Ourang Medan. The city of Baltimore, often mentioned as another witness ship, may or may not have been in the area at the time. Records are unclear or incomplete. Some researchers have found fragmentary references to the incident in old newspapers and maritime publications. A June 1940 article in a Dutch-Indonesian publication mentions a ship of that name. A 1948 article in an Italian journal discusses the incident. But these accounts differ in details: the date, the location, the exact sequence of events. It is as if multiple stories have been woven together, creating a tapestry where truth and fiction are so intertwined they cannot be separated. So we are left with a profound question. Did the Ourang Medan ever exist at all? Was there a ship, a crew, a tragedy? Or is this entire tale an elaborate legend, a maritime myth that took on a life of its own, growing more detailed and more terrifying with each retelling? Let us consider the possibility that something did happen, that some ship, perhaps not named Ourang Medan, perhaps not exactly as described, encountered disaster in those waters. What could explain the deaths of an entire crew? Some have suggested carbon monoxide poisoning from a malfunctioning engine or boiler. It is colorless, odorless, and can kill quickly. causing confusion and panic before unconsciousness. Could this explain the terrified expressions, the scattered bodies? Perhaps, though it does not explain the explosion that supposedly followed. Others have theorized about illegal cargo. The period after World War II was chaotic, with surplus military supplies, including chemical weapons, sometimes being transported in questionable circumstances. Could the Ourang Medan have been carrying something dangerous? Nerve gas, perhaps, or some experimental chemical that leaked, killed the crew and then ignited. There are whispers of piracy, of modern-day raiders who attacked the ship, killed the crew, and then rigged explosives to hide the evidence. But this does not align with the reports of no wounds, no signs of violence. Some speak of natural phenomena, a pocket of methane gas released from the ocean floor rising suddenly to envelope the ship. Methane displaces oxygen and can kill quickly. In certain concentrations, it is also highly explosive. Could this explain both the deaths and the subsequent blast? It is possible, though such incidents are extremely rare and generally do not leave victims with expressions of terror. And then there are the stranger theories, the ones that venture into realms beyond conventional explanation. Some have suggested paranormal causes, a curse, a supernatural entity, something beyond our understanding. These theories satisfy a certain narrative hunger, a desire for mystery, but they offer no answers that can be tested or verified. The truth, if there is a truth, may be simpler than any theory. Perhaps there was a ship, and there was an accident, and the story grew in the telling. Perhaps a crew died from explainable causes, and over the years the tale was embellished, details added, until it became the legend we know today. Or perhaps there was no ship at all. Perhaps the Ourang Medan is entirely fictional, a story created by a writer or a sailor with a gift for narrative. A tale that was so compelling it was believed, repeated, and eventually accepted as real. Stranger things have happened in maritime lore. The sea has always been fertile ground for legends. What is interesting about the Ourang Medan is not just the story itself, but what it tells us about mystery and belief. We want the story to be true in a way. Not because we wish tragedy upon anyone, but because we are drawn to mystery, to the unexplained, to the idea that the world still holds secrets. In our modern age, where so much can be tracked and documented and verified, where ships are monitored by satellites and GPS, where communication is instant and records are digital, there is something almost romantic about a mystery that cannot be solved. A story that resists verification. The Ourang Medan exists now in that liminal space between fact and fiction. She may never have sailed at all, yet she has achieved a kind of immortality that many real ships never attain. People around the world know her name, debate her existence, theorize about what might have happened. She has become more than a ship. She has become a legend, a symbol of maritime mystery. Imagine, for a moment, that somewhere in the Strait of Malacca, beneath the busy shipping lanes where modern freighters and tankers pass daily, there lies a wreck. Perhaps it is the Ourang Medan. Perhaps it is some other vessel. Or perhaps there is nothing there at all. But in our imagination, we can see her, rusted and encrusted with coral, home now to fish and other sea creatures, resting in the darkness of the deep. The waters above are clear and blue, warm with tropical sun. Schools of fish pass by in silver clouds. Rays glide like shadows, and far below the wreck sits silent, keeping whatever secrets it holds, real or imagined. If the Ourang Medan existed, if her crew did die in some terrible way, then they deserve to be remembered with compassion. They were sailors, like countless others, making their living from the sea, far from home and family. Whatever happened to them, whether the story is true or embellished or entirely fictional, we can honor the universal experience of sailors everywhere, the risk they take, the courage required to venture onto the open ocean. The debate about the Ourang Medan continues among maritime historians and mystery enthusiasts. Some are convinced the incident happened essentially as described and that records were lost or suppressed. Others are equally convinced it is entirely fabricated. Most fall somewhere in between, believing perhaps that something happened, but that the details have been distorted beyond recognition. New researchers occasionally claim to have found evidence. A document here, a reference there, something that might corroborate some element of the story. But nothing definitive has emerged, nothing that settles the question once and for all. The mystery remains, and perhaps that is fitting. There is beauty in uncertainty, in questions without answers. The Ourang Medan, whether she existed or not, reminds us that history is not always clear, that records can be incomplete, that some stories resist our attempts to pin them down and categorize them. In that resistance, there is a kind of freedom, a kind of poetry. So we are left with a tale that may or may not be true, a ship that may or may not have existed, a tragedy that may or may not have occurred. The Ourang Medan occupies a unique place in maritime lore, simultaneously one of the most famous ghost ships, and potentially no ghost ship at all, but rather a ghost of a ship, a phantom that exists only in story. Does it matter if the Ourang Medan was real? In one sense, yes. Truth matters, history matters, and the lives of real sailors matter greatly. But in another sense, the story has taken on a life of its own, separate from questions of historical fact. It has become part of how we think about the sea, about mystery, about the limits of what we can know. Let the story of the Ourang Medan drift through your thoughts now, neither insisting on its truth nor dismissing it entirely. See it as a tale told in port towns, passed from one sailor to another, changing slightly with each telling. See it as a reminder that the sea holds many stories, some documented and some lost, some real and some imagined. The waters of the Strait of Malacca flow on, carrying ships from one horizon to another, connecting continents, enabling commerce, supporting life. Beneath those waters, perhaps, lie wrecks and secrets. Or perhaps the greatest secret is that some mysteries need not be solved. Some questions need not be answered. Sleep now, and let mystery be just mystery, beautiful and complete in its uncertainty. Whether the Ourang Medan sailed or only sailed through imagination, she has found her place in the endless story of ships and sea. And that, perhaps, is enough. Rest well and dream of stories half told and mysteries half solved, of ships that may have been and seas that hold their secrets gently, like treasures too precious to reveal. Maritime Enigmas, the MV Joyita. In the vast expanse of the South Pacific, where islands rise like emeralds from sapphire waters, where the ocean stretches to every horizon in endless blue, a small merchant vessel set out on what should have been a routine voyage. The year was 1955, a time when the Pacific Islands relied on ships like her to carry cargo and passengers between scattered communities. Her name was Joyita, which means little jewel in Spanish, and she would become one of the Pacific's most enduring mysteries. Imagine, if you will, the waters north of Fiji, where the tropical sun beats down on gentle swells, where flying fish leap and dolphins play in the bow waves of passing ships. It is October, springtime in the southern hemisphere, when the weather is generally fair and the seas are kind. And somewhere in these waters, the Joyita drifts, half submerged, listing heavily to one side, completely and utterly abandoned. Let us begin with the Joyita herself, for every ship has a story before the mystery begins. She was born in 1931 in Los Angeles, California, built as a luxury yacht for the wealthy director Roland West. 70 feet long, she was constructed of cedar planking over white oak frames, a beautiful vessel designed for pleasure cruising along the California coast. She had a distinctive enclosed wheelhouse, unusual for yachts of her era, and engines that once purred smoothly as she cut through Pacific waters. During World War II, like many civilian vessels, the Joyita was pressed into military service. The U.S. Navy used her as a patrol boat, and she served her country faithfully, watching for submarines and escorting convoys. After the war, she found her way to the South Pacific, eventually ending up in Samoa, where she began a new life as a merchant vessel and charter boat, carrying cargo and passengers between the islands. By 1955, the Joyita was showing her age. She was 24 years old, which in ship years is not young, especially for a vessel working hard in tropical waters. Her engines were temperamental, her hull had been patched and repaired multiple times, But she was still seaworthy, still useful, still making her runs between the islands that depended on her. On October 3, 1955, the Joyita prepared to depart Apia Harbor in Samoa, bound for the Tokelau Islands, about 270 miles to the north. She carried a mixed cargo: medical supplies, timber, food stores, oil drums, and various goods needed by the island communities. Aboard were 25 people, 16 passengers and 9 crew members, including her captain, Thomas Dusty Miller. Captain Miller was well known in the islands, an American who had made the South Pacific his home. He knew these waters, had navigated them many times before. The Joyita was his command, and though she was old and sometimes troublesome, he understood her quirks and limitations. The departure was delayed. One of the Joyita's 2 engines was not running properly, and repairs took time. The sun was setting by the time the vessel finally left harbor, later than planned, heading out into the darkening Pacific. Those who watched her go had no reason to worry. It was a familiar voyage, a route the Joyita had made many times before. The Joyita was expected to reach Tokelau within 48 hours, 2 days, perhaps a bit more, depending on weather and the temperamental engine. But 2 days passed, then 3, then 4. The Joyita did not arrive. Radio silence stretched on. Concern grew into alarm. A search was launched. Aircraft flew over the route, scanning the blue waters below for any sign of the missing vessel. Ships diverted to search the area. But the Pacific is vast, and finding one small ship is like finding a particular drop of water in the ocean. Days turned into weeks. Hope began to fade. Then, on November 10th, more than 5 weeks after the Joyita had departed Samoa, a merchant vessel named the Tuvalu spotted something unusual. A small ship, listing heavily, barely afloat, drifting northwest of Fiji, about 600 miles off her intended course. It was the Joyita, half submerged, her starboard side riding low in the water, but still afloat, still drifting. The Tuvalu approached carefully. The Joyita appeared deserted, but she was still afloat, despite being partially flooded. When a boarding party finally climbed aboard the tilted waterlogged deck, they found themselves in another of the sea's peculiar mysteries. The Joyita was empty. All 25 people, passengers and crew, had vanished. But unlike some abandoned ships, the Joyita told a story through the evidence left behind. Even if that story was difficult to read, full of contradictions and puzzling details. The ship was listing badly to starboard because the engine room and aft sections were flooded. Water sloshed in the lower decks, heavy and dark. But remarkably, the Joyita remained afloat. Her cork-lined hull, installed when she was a luxury yacht, gave her unusual buoyancy. She was designed in such a way that she could not sink, at least not completely. Even half-flooded, she stayed on the surface, tilted but persistent. The boarding party found the ship's radio. It was tuned to the international distress frequency, suggesting someone had tried to call for help. But the radio cable had been mysteriously torn away from the radio house, rendering it useless. Had someone deliberately sabotaged it? Or had it been damaged by accident in rough seas? Personal belongings remained aboard. Suitcases and bags sat in the cabins, suggesting the passengers had not taken their belongings when they left. The ship's medical supplies were mostly gone, but other cargo remained. The timber, some of the oil drums, various goods still secured in the hold. There were more puzzling details. The ship's logbook, sextant, chronometer, and other navigation equipment were missing. The 3 lifeboats were gone, and the Joyita's dinghy had also vanished. Canvas awnings had been rigged on deck, as if to provide shelter from the sun. A doctor's bag was found, opened, with some items missing. Most intriguingly, there were patches of blood on the deck and in several locations throughout the ship. Not large amounts, but enough to notice, enough to raise questions. Whose blood? What had happened? There were no bodies, no obvious signs of violence beyond these mysterious stains. An official inquiry was launched, investigators poring over every detail, trying to piece together what had happened. The Joyita was towed to port and examined thoroughly. Slowly, some facts emerged, though the complete picture remained frustratingly elusive. The flooding had been caused by a broken pipe in the engine cooling system. Water had poured in steadily, gradually filling the engine room and aft compartments. With only one engine working from the start, and now water flooding the engine spaces, the Joyita would have lost power. She would have been drifting, unable to make headway, listing more and more as water accumulated. But here was the crucial detail. Because of her cork-lined hull, the Joyita could not sink completely. Even fully flooded, she would have remained partially afloat, exactly as she was found. If Captain Miller knew this, and he likely did, given his familiarity with the vessel, why would he order an evacuation? Perhaps he did not realize the extent of her buoyancy. Perhaps in the darkness, with the ship listing badly and taking on water, the situation seemed more dire than it actually was. With passengers aboard, including women and children, the decision to abandon ship might have seemed the safest option. The investigators considered many scenarios. The most straightforward explanation was that Captain Miller, faced with a flooding, powerless vessel, made the decision to evacuate everyone into the lifeboats. Perhaps he intended to stay close to the Joyita, waiting for rescue. But something went wrong. The South Pacific, for all its beauty, can be treacherous. Squalls blow up suddenly. Waves that seem manageable from a ship's deck are different when you are in a small boat. 3 lifeboats carrying 25 people, drifting in open ocean, would be vulnerable to weather, to waves, to the simple challenge of staying together. Perhaps the lifeboats became separated from each other. Perhaps they capsized in rough seas. Perhaps they drifted for days until thirst and exposure took their toll. The Pacific is vast, and small boats can vanish without trace. None of the lifeboats were ever found. None of the 25 people were ever seen again. But other theories emerged, darker and more complex. The blood on the deck suggested injury, or possibly violence. Had there been an accident aboard? Had someone been hurt, requiring evacuation? Or had something more sinister occurred? Some whispered of piracy. The Pacific Islands in the 1950s were not entirely free of criminal activity. Could the Joyita have been intercepted by pirates or smugglers? But if so, why abandon the ship rather than taking her as prize? Why leave cargo behind? Others suggested mutiny. Perhaps the crew, frustrated with a failing ship and a difficult voyage, had turned against the captain. But the presence of passengers, including children, made this scenario less plausible. And again, where did everyone go? Mutineers do not simply vanish along with their victims. There was speculation about Japanese fishing boats. Some theorized that the Joyita might have encountered Japanese fishing vessels operating illegally in Pacific waters, and that some confrontation occurred. This would explain the blood and the disappearance, but no evidence ever emerged to support this theory. Insurance fraud was mentioned. Could Captain Miller have deliberately disabled his ship, planning to abandon her and claim insurance money? But Miller himself was among the missing, and insurance fraud schemes rarely involve disappearing along with all passengers and crew. The inquiry eventually concluded that the Joyita had experienced mechanical failure, that the flooding caused the captain to order evacuation, and that the lifeboats had met with disaster, whether through weather, accident, or other misfortune. But this conclusion satisfied few people. Too many questions remained unanswered. Too many details did not quite fit. The mystery of the Joyita is different from some ghost ship tales because the ship herself survived to tell part of her story. She was not destroyed, not lost to the depths. She floated, patient and persistent, until she was found. And yet, in many ways, this makes the mystery deeper. We have the vessel, we can examine her, we can study the evidence she carried, but we still cannot say with certainty what happened. The Joyita was eventually repaired and returned to service, sailing again in the Pacific under new owners. She worked for several more years, carrying cargo, no longer associated with mystery, but simply doing the work ships do. Eventually, she was abandoned in Samoa and left to deteriorate. By the 1960s, she had sunk in the harbor, a quiet end for a ship that had once captured international attention. But her mystery lives on. The 25 people who sailed aboard her that October night in 1955 are still missing, their fate unknown. Were they lost to the sea in lifeboats that sank? Did they reach some island and perish there? Did something else entirely happen, something none of the theories have captured? Think of the Joyita as she drifted those weeks after her abandonment, half submerged but afloat, listing under the tropical sun. Flying fish would have leapt past her. Seabirds might have landed on her tilted deck, resting during their long flights across the Pacific. The stars wheeled overhead at night, the same stars that Polynesian navigators had used for centuries to find their way across these waters. She drifted with currents and wind, traveling hundreds of miles from where she should have been. A ghost ship in the truest sense, present but empty, visible but silent, offering evidence but no answers. The Pacific waters supported her, held her afloat, carried her along until finally she was spotted by the Tuvalu and her solitary journey ended. The families of those 25 people never learned what became of their loved ones. Captain Miller, the passengers, the crew, they remain missing, their story incomplete. In cemeteries and family histories, they are remembered, but their final chapter was never written, or was written in water and wind, in a language we cannot quite read. The Joyita reminds us that mysteries do not always involve the supernatural or the inexplicable. Sometimes the mystery is simply that we do not know. We have facts, a flooding ship, an abandonment, missing people, but we do not have the complete narrative that connects these facts into a clear story. In our desire to understand, we create theories, each one plausible, each one incomplete. Perhaps the truth is in one of these theories. Perhaps it is in some combination we have not considered. Or perhaps the truth was known only to those 25 people, and they carried it with them into whatever fate befell them. There is something humbling about unsolved mysteries like the Joyita. Despite our cleverness, our investigative techniques, our logical reasoning, we cannot always reconstruct the past. We cannot always answer the questions that history poses. Some stories remain fragmented, some endings remain unwritten. The little jewel of the Pacific became famous not for her years of faithful service, not for her work during the war, but for this one voyage that ended in mystery. It seems unfair, in a way, that the Joyita should be remembered primarily for tragedy rather than for the useful life she led. But such is the nature of maritime law. It is the mysteries we remember, the questions that haunt us. In the South Pacific today, ships still travel between the islands, carrying goods and passengers, following routes not so different from the one the Joyita attempted that October night. The waters are the same, blue and vast and beautiful. The islands still rise green and lush from the sea. Life continues, as it always does, moving forward while mysteries remain suspended in time. Let the story of the Joyita settle gently in your thoughts. See her as she was found, tilted but afloat, persistent in her buoyancy, refusing to sink even when half flooded. There is something admirable in that stubborn buoyancy, that refusal to give up, even without anyone aboard to appreciate it. The 25 souls who sailed on her have passed beyond our knowing. Whatever happened to them, whatever their final hours were like, we can hope they found some peace, some rest. The sea has taken them into its keeping, and the sea, for all its mysteries, is also a place of beauty and endless rhythm. Sleep now and let the gentle swells of the Pacific rock you softly. Dream of tropical waters warm and blue, of islands on distant horizons, of ships that sail and return, and of the few that do not, but become instead part of the eternal story of the sea. The Joyita drifted once through these waters, carrying her mystery. Now she rests, and we can rest too, accepting that some questions linger like stars, distant, beautiful, unreachable. Rest well, and let the mystery be gentle, the unknown be peaceful, the unanswered questions drift away on the evening tide. Maritime Enigmas. The Kaz II. Ghost ships, we often think, belong to another era. They are vessels from Victorian times, from the age of sail, from periods when the sea was less understood and ships could vanish into vastness without trace. We imagine them shrouded in fog, their wooden hulls creaking, their canvas sails tattered by wind and time. But the sea does not confine its mysteries to the past. Even in our modern age of GPS and satellite phones, of radar and emergency beacons, ships can still become enigmas. And nowhere is this more evident than in the story of the Kaz II. Close your eyes and picture the coast of Australia in April 2007. The Great Barrier Reef stretches along the Queensland shore, a ribbon of coral and turquoise water. Autumn in the southern hemisphere brings pleasant sailing weather, warm days, gentle winds, clear skies. It is the kind of weather that calls to sailors, that makes them dream of open water and distant horizons. This is where our story begins, not in some distant past, but in the very recent present, in a world much like our own. The Kaz II was a catamaran, a modern sailing vessel with twin hulls that give stability and speed. She was 40 feet long, painted white, her twin hulls cutting through water with the efficiency that catamarans are known for. She was well equipped, carrying all the safety equipment required by Australian maritime law: life jackets, emergency beacon, radio, GPS navigation. She was not some ancient wooden ship held together with tar and hope, but a contemporary vessel with modern conveniences and technology. On April 15, 2007, the Kaz II departed Airlie Beach in Queensland, beginning what was planned as a leisurely sailing trip north along the coast to Townsville. Aboard were 3 men: Derek Batten, aged 56, who owned the catamaran, and his friends Peter Tunstead, 69, and James Goslan, 56. They were experienced sailors, these men. They knew the waters, understood the sea, had made similar journeys before. This was to be a pleasant voyage, a few days of sailing among friends, enjoying the beautiful Queensland coast. The weather was favourable, the Kaz II was in good condition. The men were in good spirits as they set sail, leaving the marina behind, heading out into the blue. Those who saw them depart had no concerns. It was an ordinary departure, the kind that happens thousands of times each year along Australia's vast coastline. On April 18th, 3 days after the Kaz II had departed, a helicopter conducting routine coastal surveillance spotted something unusual. A catamaran was drifting about 80 nautical miles off the coast, north of Townsville. Her sails were up but badly shredded, suggesting she had been through rough weather or had been under sail for some time without proper tending. She was moving erratically, pushed by wind and current, with no apparent control. The helicopter crew tried to make radio contact. There was no response. They circled lower, observing the vessel more closely. There appeared to be no one on deck, no sign of life aboard. The situation seemed wrong, concerning. They reported the sighting and a rescue operation was initiated. The next day, April 19th, a Queensland emergency management helicopter reached the Kaz II. A rescue swimmer was lowered to the drifting catamaran, prepared for various scenarios: injured crew, disabled vessel, perhaps people below deck unable to respond. But what he found when he landed on the deck was something altogether stranger and more unsettling than any emergency he might have expected. The Kaz II was a ghost ship, but a ghost ship of the modern age. She was not empty in the way old sailing ships were found empty, bare and weathered and obviously abandoned. No, the Kaz II looked as if her crew had simply stepped away for a moment and would return at any time. The rescue swimmer moved carefully across the deck, taking in the scene. A laptop computer sat in the cabin, still turned on, though its battery had long since died. The ship's radio and GPS were functioning normally. The emergency beacon had not been activated. No distress signal had ever been sent. Life jackets hung in their proper places, unworn, suggesting no one had prepared for an emergency evacuation. In the cabin, a table was set for a meal. Plates, utensils, and food were laid out as if someone was about to eat. Coffee cups sat nearby. Personal belongings were scattered around: clothes, books, the ordinary items of daily life aboard a boat. Nothing suggested panic or sudden evacuation. Nothing indicated violence or struggle. The cabin looked lived in, comfortable, normal, except that no one was there. The engines were in working order. The boat itself was mechanically sound. There was no flooding, no damage that would explain an abandonment. One of the sails was up and shredded, but the others were properly furled. The vessel's dinghy was still attached, trailing behind on its painter. The crew had not taken the small boat to leave. And most puzzling of all, 3 life jackets and some fishing equipment were found on the deck, as if they had been set down and never picked up again. The boat's emergency positioning beacon was aboard, inactivated. It was as if the three men had simply vanished into the air, leaving everything behind, leaving no clue as to where they had gone or why. When news of the discovery reached the public, there was immediate fascination. In 2007, with the internet connecting the world, the story of the Kaz II spread quickly. People were captivated by the mystery. How could three men disappear from a modern boat in good weather, leaving everything behind as if they had merely stepped away? This was not supposed to happen in the 21st century, not with GPS and radios and coast guards and rescue services. A massive search was launched. Aircraft scoured the waters where the Kaz II had been drifting. Boats crisscrossed the area, looking for any sign of the three men. The coastline was searched in case they had somehow made it to shore. Days passed, then weeks. No trace of Derek Batten, Peter Tunstead, or James Gosselin was ever found. They had simply vanished as completely as any crew from the Age of Sail. An official investigation was launched, marine experts examining the Kaz II thoroughly, trying to understand what had happened. They studied the vessel's condition, the weather records for the days in question, the last known positions. They interviewed people who knew the men, who had spoken with them before their departure. They analyzed every piece of evidence, every detail, searching for an explanation. Slowly, investigators began to piece together a possible scenario. Though, like all theories about ghost ships, it remained just that. A theory, a possibility, not a certainty. The weather records showed that on April 15th and 16th, the area experienced some rough conditions. Not severe storms, but choppy seas, strong winds, enough to make sailing challenging. The shredded sail suggested the Kaz II had been running under sail in these conditions, possibly with the sail up longer than ideal, allowing it to be damaged by the wind. Investigators theorized that one of the men might have gone into the water. Perhaps someone went swimming and got into difficulty, or perhaps someone fell overboard accidentally. In trying to rescue their companion, the other two men might have also ended up in the water. Without life jackets on, and the life jackets were all found aboard, they would have been vulnerable, especially if the seas were rough. Catamarans, with their wide beam and stability, are actually quite difficult to reboard from the water without a ladder, especially if the boat is moving and the person in the water is tired or panicked. If all three men ended up in the water, unable to get back aboard, they would have been left behind as the Kaz II sailed on, carried by wind and current, becoming smaller and smaller in the distance until it was gone and they were alone in the ocean. It is a scenario that explains the facts: the undamaged boat, the lack of distress signal, the presence of all the safety equipment, the unactivated beacon, the appearance that everything was normal. A tragic accident, quick and unexpected, leaving no time for radio calls or beacon activation. But as with all maritime mysteries, we cannot be certain. Other scenarios are possible. Perhaps there was a medical emergency, a heart attack, a stroke, and in the confusion and panic, something went wrong. Perhaps there was an argument or conflict that ended in tragedy. Perhaps something else entirely happened, something no investigator has considered. The sea gives up some secrets, but keeps others. The bodies of the three men were never recovered. Without them, without survivors to tell the story, we are left with evidence and inference, with possibilities and probabilities, but not with certainty. What strikes many people about the Kaz II is how modern it is. This was not a wooden sailing ship from centuries past. This was a fiberglass catamaran with GPS, built in an age when we can track ships from space, when emergency beacons can alert rescuers within minutes, when maritime safety has never been more advanced. And yet, three men vanished just as completely as sailors from the age of the Mary Celeste. There is something humbling about the Kaz II's story. It reminds us that for all our technology, for all our safety equipment and communication devices, the sea remains the sea. It is vast and powerful and unpredictable. A moment's inattention, a single accident, an unexpected circumstance. These can change everything in an instant. The ocean does not care about our GPS systems or our radar. It does not distinguish between a wooden schooner from 1872 and a modern catamaran from 2007. It treats all vessels and all sailors the same, with the same indifference, the same power, the same capacity for both beauty and danger. Imagine the Kaz II drifting those days after the men disappeared. The sun rose and set, painting the sky in colors of pink and gold. The stars wheeled overhead at night, brilliant in the darkness away from shore lights. Flying fish skimmed the waves. Dolphins perhaps played in the bow wave. The boat sailed on, her systems still functioning, her sails catching wind, following no course. Going nowhere in particular, an empty shell moving across the water. Inside the cabin, the laptop battery slowly drained. The food on the table slowly spoiled in the tropical heat. The coffee grew cold. Everything waited, preserved for a moment before time and exposure would begin their work. The Kaz II had become a time capsule, a snapshot of ordinary life interrupted, a moment frozen when everything changed. The families of Derek Batten, Peter Tunstead and James Goslan were left without closure, without certain knowledge of what happened. The investigation concluded with its theory of accidental drowning, but theories, however plausible, are not the same as knowing. The three men simply vanished, and their loved ones were left with absence and questions. This is perhaps the hardest part of maritime mysteries, not the question of what happened to the ship, but what happened to the people. These were real individuals with families, friends, lives, dreams. Derek Batten owned the Kaz II and loved sailing. Peter Tunstead and James Goslan were his companions. Men who enjoyed being on the water, who trusted the sea. They deserve to be remembered not just as a mystery, but as people. The Kaz II herself was eventually recovered and examined thoroughly. After the investigation concluded, she was sold. Someone else sails her now, perhaps, under a different name. She has moved on from her moment of mystery, returned to ordinary service, to the normal life of a boat. But her story remains, a reminder and a caution. In 2007, when the Kaz II was found, social media was just beginning to connect the world in new ways. The story spread online, discussed in forums and comment sections, debated by armchair investigators around the globe. Some people compared it to historic ghost ships, noting the similarities to the Mary Celeste. Others focused on the modern aspects, the GPS and computers and cell phones that proved useless in preventing tragedy. The story captured something about our contemporary relationship with the sea. We think we have tamed it, understood it, made it safe through technology. We have weather forecasts and satellite tracking, coast guards and rescue helicopters. We can communicate instantly across oceans, summon help with the press of a button. And yet 3 men vanished from a modern boat on a pleasant sailing trip, and all our technology could not prevent it, could not explain it, could not bring them back. The Kaz II reminds us that we are still small creatures on a very large ocean, that despite our cleverness and our devices, we remain vulnerable, that the sea still keeps mysteries, still writes stories we can only partially read. Ghost ships are not relics of the past. They are not confined to the age of sail or to Victorian sensibilities. They exist in our modern world, a reminder that some things have not changed despite all our progress. The sea is still the sea, ships still sail, people still venture onto the water. And sometimes, inexplicably, mysteriously, those people do not return. The Kaz II is unique among ghost ships because she is so recent, so modern, so much like the boats that sail today along coastlines around the world. She could be any recreational vessel, any sailing catamaran enjoying a coastal cruise. And that is perhaps what makes her story so poignant. She reminds us that mystery can happen to anyone, that the inexplicable is not safely distant in history, but can occur in our own time, to people much like ourselves. Let the story of the Kaz II settle gently in your thoughts. See her as she was found, drifting in Australian waters, modern and well-equipped, yet empty and silent. See the laptop, the meal set out, the life jackets hanging unused, all the ordinary details of life aboard a boat, waiting for people who would never return. 3 friends set out on a sailing trip along a beautiful coast on a pleasant autumn day. What happened to them remains a mystery, perhaps a simple accident, perhaps something more complex, but ultimately unknowable. They are remembered now, Derek and Peter and James, not just as a mystery, but as sailors who loved the sea, who trusted it, who ventured upon it as humans have done for thousands of years. Sleep now, and let the gentle rolling of waves carry you into dreams. The sea continues its eternal rhythm, indifferent to our questions, beautiful in its vastness. The Kaz II sails on in memory, a modern ghost ship, a reminder that some mysteries span all of human history, from the age of sail to the age of satellites, unchanged and enduring. Rest well and dream of blue waters and distant horizons, of sailing vessels moving gracefully across the waves, of the eternal dance between humanity and the sea. Some questions linger like stars, distant, beautiful, unreachable, and in their mystery there is a strange and peaceful beauty. Good night, and let the mysteries of the sea rock you gently to sleep.